Right, so this is instant response. Now, by the way, I've kind of made a mess of this course in case you haven't noticed. The boss of the Sox is in this and another course, and 100 people have done it who are not in the course. So I signed midterm grades today. So check in Canvas, check your midterm grade. I've got extra credit here and there and all over the place to where I'm not sure I found it all. And some people are using fake names. So if you somehow did not get your credit correctly, please check and let me know, because that could happen. I found like the 3 or 4 students that were using fake names I knew, and a whole bunch of names I didn't recognize on the various charts. So anyway, so let me know if I did not find you. And anyway, so let's talk about chapter 11 here. Is where we're down to, which is more how to investigate an incident. So this is analysis methodology. All right. So you have to define your objectives. This, by the way, is a big issue. A lot of non-technical managers do not understand what is possible. I remember I first learned this when I took a fiber optics class, and they said you will have to educate the customer about what they want because they don't understand the technology at all. All right, then you get data, inspect it, perform conversions and such, choose a method, perform analysis, and evaluate the results. It sounds kind of meaningless, but we'll go through it in some extent. And so the first thing, of course, is the objectives. What are you trying to find out? And are you going to be able to answer that question in a reasonable amount of time? This is important. A lot of people might want to say, who hacked us? And they say, well, in fact, figuring out who hacked you is a big project, and what value is that anyway? Now, more people are doing it now than they used to. Everybody used to ignore it. Now it is more valuable to figure out who hacked you, because there's information about the threat actors out there, and if you figure it out, you can maybe predict what other techniques they'll use and decide whether you could negotiate with them and stuff. But it's still not that useful. So figure out which resources you need, who wants the results, and what do they plan to do with them. This is why I mentioned before, human skills, communication skills are real important, because you very often have to push back on unreasonable demands from executives without insulting them. They want something that is going to be too expensive or going to be too hard to find, and they don't really need it to accomplish the real goals. And so you have to be able to communicate with people effectively and help guide them without insulting them. So find out who's going to define the identity, the objective, who's the leader. Make sure everybody knows who the leader is. That will help avoid the chaos of people running around undoing each other's work, which is what happens when you don't have clear paths of leadership. And if you try to prove something negative, this is kind of pointless. Like proving a server is not compromised is essentially impossible, because you'll find a lot of weird stuff on the machine. You don't know if it should be there or not. What you can do is detect known viruses and things like that, but your logs aren't perfect, your antivirus is not perfect, your audit trails are not perfect. You really never know that things are perfectly clean. You might think that if you restore it from your backup, then it's clean. But when China hacked Google in 2010, they found out this is not true. They put malware on them that would do absolutely nothing but sleep for 3 months or up to 3 years and then wake up. So that it would get in your backups, you use them, everything's fine, and then it wakes up years later and starts stealing your data again. Because, this is the problem. When your enemy is an enemy military, they are really smart, and they have a lot of tools and resources, and they're not messing around. And they also know everything you're going to do to detect them and to maintain your network, so they lay booby traps and all that. So positive goals are things you can do. You can look for certain indicators of compromise and see if they're there. Then you can pay reasonable opinion that it's not compromised. And so realistic questions are, you can't really say if there's any malware on the machine, but you can say if certain malware is on the machine. This is why whenever you read advertising and they say this product is perfectly secure, then you know you're dealing with an idiot, because there is no such thing. There is no perfection in anything. There's no perfect security. What there is more secure, reasonably secure, secure against this attack. That's what you can have. People that know what they're talking about understand that they only provide certain limited benefits, all of your products. So you got to have your scope. Look at a hard drive, look at all the email, that's too vague. What's more real is to say, look for what email this person received in the past month, that kind of thing. This is the fundamental problem, especially beginning forensic examiners can just wade through something like a hard drive image forever, finding all sorts of stuff and getting lost. So you want to understand what the real goal of this is. And by the way, it's usually pretty obvious. Usually the goal is, did we get hacked? If so, what damage was done, what did they steal, what else did they do, and how do we get rid of them? And then how do we clean things up so they can't come back? That's usually the goal, but make sure you understand what their goals are. And you may need to help them guide to the objectives because they don't understand what's possible or reasonable. In the world of normal tech support, if you go to your executive and you ask them, how much server uptime do we have? They'll say 100%. You have to say, no, there is nothing on earth that gets 100%. Google doesn't get that. Yahoo doesn't get that. Amazon doesn't get that. All the money in the world will not get you 100%. You can get 3 nines, you can have 4 nines, you can have 5 nines, and each one will cost you 10 or 100 times more. So if you want to spend many millions of dollars, I can get you to what we call 5 nines, which in practice will only be 3 nines, but maybe I won't mention that today. I'll have excuses when it goes down for a day, because 5 nines means 5 minutes of downtime a year. Nobody actually achieves that, not for long. Then they have a pile of excuses when it goes down for a day. Well, except for that day, we were up 5 nines. See?
That's like Google's number recently, and they said 99.9% for their business workspace.
Yeah, there was a 365 Main is a big data center, and there were 5 nines data center. They went down for like 3 days. There's a line out the door. There's a pile of excuses. They're giving people free service to make up for it. That's what happens. You pretend you're 5 nines, but nobody can do it. And I remember on Security Weekly, there was a product that advertised they had backups and they had extra copies of backups encrypted. They said, our product is so secure, we have 15 nines of reliability. I'm thinking, what is this garbage? And I went and looked on Wikipedia. I said, what is the chance of the entire Earth being destroyed in the next 100 years? And that's like 1%. And I said, therefore, nothing can be more than 3 nines for anything because the whole planet, all civilization could collapse. So, you got to define your terms. Anyway, I'm sure that within the parameters of like their mathematics, they could withstand enough server failures that they calculated in some principle as 59. So like when DNA came out, they did a DNA test and they said, now criminology is 100% perfect. And the very first batch, they accused the wrong man because the technician labeled the wrong vial. Maybe your mathematics is good, but things can go wrong. Anyway, you got to find your data. You have your computers storing hard drives. Oh, let's see if there's comments in the chat here. Whoa. There. All right, no new ones. Okay. And of course, you got external storage, and you have virtual desktops. These are where you're just working in a cloud desktop or a VDI infrastructure, sort of RDPing into something, so that none of the data is stored on your local machine, which, by the way, is a pretty good idea for security. All your data is always on the server, so it's where the company can encrypt it and back it up and secure it. So you got your data servers all over the place, rack mounted with a lot of hard drives, additional drives, storage area networks. You got all the mobile devices. And like I say, you would be well advised to use virtual desktops. So in fact, the company data is not really on the mobile device. But in fact, people usually have emails and IMs there anyway, and often other things. And then it's going to get on all these portable things, USBs, CDs, and your network attached storage and storage area network are big, expensive things, probably under company control, but these little things are not. I read an article a few years ago where they said the average executive owns 20 USB drives and has lost 15 of them. And they're all out there with God knows what on them. Company data leaking everywhere, unless they were actually encrypted or something, which they almost never are. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't know if people are carrying around USB flash drives as much as they used to. And then you got your network devices like firewalls, switches, and routers. Now, Donald Trump made a big deal about how the routers are going to prove that China hacked the election, which is pretty hard to understand because there's no actual data in the routers. All it has is a routing table, and it might have a log of what connections have been made. So that's all we don't show any user data. There's not much PII or direct implementation there, although, as I mentioned, Volt Typhoon, the new Chinese threat, is in fact hacking the routers and putting malware on the routers and the firewalls. So you might find malware there these days, although it is not going to be easy to find. And in fact, CISA got hacked by hacking into their Avanti switches, and Avanti switches are getting Avanti load balancers and VPN appliances, I think, are getting hacked like crazy and infected with malware, and the official Avanti tool to detect the malware does not work. It'll tell you you're clean when you're not clean. So that's when CISA recommended just throwing that stuff away and getting a different brand. a couple weeks ago, which might have something to do with the fact that their Ivanti got hacked at the CISA. First they said, clean it, use the official tool, and then a few days later they said, just throw it away. All right, then of course you got your cloud services. Everybody's putting everything in the cloud. Dropbox, Google Cloud, Amazon, all over the place, hosted timesheets and payroll. Everybody does this to save money and get higher reliability. And then if you ask the question, where is our data? How many copies of our data? How much are we actually in control of what's happening to all our data? You can get a disturbing answer. And if you don't actually have good organized security in your company, like if one common security flaw is to be Dr. No. You say, no, you cannot do anything. You must ask for permission. I'm the only one that will approve it, and it will take me too long to approve it, so you'll miss your deadline. So if you're that kind of guy, they call it Dr. No, then everybody will just, without permission, spin up an Amazon machine and put up whatever they need. And that's shadow IT, and now you've got stuff you don't even know about. So it's not getting backed up, it's not getting encrypted, it's not testing for your compliance and all that. That's why you have to be reasonable. You have to remember the role of the security person is to help the business people get the job done in a secure way, not to tell them no, because they got their work to do. And all right, so you got to have backups. You can store them locally, but of course you can't have local backups on site because if the building burns down, it's gone. You got to move them off site. And so a lot of people use cloud-based services like Carbonite or Mozy. In the old days, I remember people would just have one of the staff secretary workers would just take it home in her car every night, and then it would get stolen out of her car. And I was telling them they should be encrypting those backups, and everybody said, Joe, shut up, kid. And well, who am I? But anyway, of course, if we had, then somebody would forget the password or something. When we actually tried to use a backup, we found out that the guy that was handling that was the idiot that was always smoking weed out by the dumpster, and he hadn't changed the tapes in a month. So didn't really have the backups. He was supposed to be changing tapes, but of course he didn't. So whatever you have, test it. Make sure it works. Because something you don't actually use to serve customers, like backups, is something you may not notice it's broken for a long time. So you should have some kind of periodic where you attempt to restore something from backup. Let's just see if that stuff is actually working. Anyway, so you got operating system evidence, which of course is usually not terribly interesting because the operating system is just from a company like Microsoft and doesn't contain anything personal data. Then your applications and user data is where you find the most interesting stuff. And then you have network service and instrumentation. Usually this is where the important stuff is, applications and user data. But it's possible that you'll need to know the other information. You have file systems, NTFS for Windows and HFS Plus for Mac. And you may have other things if you have Linux like ext4s. You have to understand them. You need running processes and network ports. Those are transient states, logs, and specific data sources like the Windows registry and Apple plist and such, internal parts of the operating system that keep track of what's been happening. So the file systems, you got allocation units. When you have a file name, it is put in some kind of master file table and connected to a series of clusters. Those are the allocation units. Typically 4 kilobytes is the unit of disk that can be assigned to a file, and that means there are active files that have a file name and an owner and a timestamp that are connected to data that's in use, and you have deleted files where you no longer have the name or the owner or the timestamp, but the data is still sitting there on the magnetic hard drive. And you have unallocated space, which is space that is not currently in use but might have residual data from previous files. And you have file slack, which is fragments of data left over from previous files that were there. So this is why if you don't do a forensic wipe of your drive, it's full of all kinds of old stuff left on it, because magnetic hard drives do not erase until you're writing new stuff on there. So the old stuff just stays on there. That is not true of SSDs. Not if they have everything up to the modern standards. The background garbage collection, it doesn't always run, but it should run if you have up-to-date operating system, up-to-date drivers, and an appropriate model of SSD installed. Then it should be automatically erasing the data. Anyway, so you've learned the timestamps. In UFS, there's inodes and resource forks, file allocation tables. These are all various components that are used to allocate the data. And if you want to learn about it, there's a book. Brian Carrier is the expert. He wrote ProDiscover, I think, and he had the most detailed book. I went through this book one time. It was very technical and burdensome for the students. We went through and fixed NTFS files and stuff. And it gets pretty complicated, and it's really not that important to do it manually anymore. Automated tools like Autopsy will do it for you. All right, then you got the browser cache. Your local copies of web pages you've been going to, databases and server logs, chat programs and email programs. All these things often leave data behind even when the application is uninstalled. So you might find stuff there. And your user data, of course. Stuff that goes in your documents folder, spreadsheets, and all that jazz. Now, if you have a personal machine, it's just stored on your local hard drive. If you have a company machine, this stuff should be redirected to a server. So it should be under control of the company, and therefore available if you have to throw away your machine to get another one, that sort of thing, or clean it off. And then you got your network instrumentation, your DNS and DHCP servers, flow data, recording what's been happening on the network, your IDS and IPS systems recording known malicious traffic, and firewalls having logs of connections, most important being rejected connections, some people trying to probe your network. These are all more kinds of data. So once you get your raw data, it's often in an unfriendly format, like encrypted or encoded, and you're going to have to turn it into some kind of standard format. And sometimes it's broken. Sometimes you have a broken file, an image with errors on it, and you want to cope with that. So determine what you have. If somebody else is handing you the data, you have to ask good questions to understand exactly what have you got here and what does it mean. You often will have trouble using the data you receive. When I was a database administrator for fraud restitution, we got data that had been seized from criminals, and they said, okay, go through this data and figure out who the customers are and how much money each customer got. And often you would have some horrible thing like semi-broken old floppy disk backups or something, and you have to somehow try to figure out what it means. And that was the job. This is often the case, and often things go wrong. So your disk image could be encrypted. If it is, you're probably out of luck. If it's encrypted with something like BitLocker, unless you find the key somewhere, you're probably not getting in. That is the whole point of BitLocker. It could be something from a RAID. That would really be bad. Then you're going to have to figure out how the stripes go and reconstruct them, which is quite a chore. Anyway, disk images come. The most common by far is expert witness format. But you can also have raw ones from Linux, DD, or virtual machine disk files. And you can convert any one of those formats to another. All right. And it can be encoded in various ways. So these all three things say the same thing. This is base64 encoding, where you take this phrase, turn it into 8 bits per character for ASCII, then you break it up again, only 6 bits, in groups of 6, so each 3 letters here turn into 4 characters of base64, because this is 4 times 6, this is 24 bits, and these 3 letters are 24 bits. So this is not encrypting, it's just encoding, but it does change it into something that's hard to read. This is UU encoding, which is a similar system. And this is an MD5 hash, which is, in fact, not generally reversible. But anyway, this is the thing you're going to find. Often your data is in some funny format, and you're going to have to convert it back to some standard format like just plain text. This is why it was a big deal in 2008 when Microsoft finally quit inventing a unique proprietary binary format for every Office product. They had this binary format for Word documents, another one for Excel spreadsheets, until everybody was going out of your mind, because when you have to do a forensic search, like we need all the evidence about this case, we need everything that refers to the Oracle merger over the last 7 years, you have to have a special tool to dig into each of these proprietary binary formats. So in 2008, Microsoft finally bit the bullet and said, to hell with it, everything is now plain text XML. Your Word document and your spreadsheets and everything since 2008 have just been plain text XML and then zipped, which is much friendlier. Now you can search for a keyword and it's in there in plain text everywhere. There was really no reason to use anything else, but it took them a while to figure that out. Anyway, then here's another one. You can have a hex dump where you have the address here, then the hex values, then the text here. Well, now, this has credit card numbers, but if you search for like 16 digits, you're not going to find it because part of the number is here and part of the number is there, and there's junk in between. So this is exactly the kind of thing I used to do all the time. You'd get something, in an unfriendly format, and you have to turn it back into a good format. Like, all I really want is just the text, none of this garbage, and correctly put back together. That's the kind of thing you have to do a lot. And this was like Mark Lindell's PCAPs. You probably heard about him when he thought that he was proving that the election of 2020 was rigged. He claimed to have these PCAPs that proved that. He flew a bunch of experts, security experts, to a special location and had a whole presentation where he was going to prove that the election was hacked with PCAPs. And he showed the PCAPs on the screen, and the PCAPs are just ASCII dumps. These are plain ASCII characters. The PCAPs were just a list of names and addresses of voters in ASCII presented in hex order. He claimed they were packet captures, which they were not, proving that China had hacked the election. But anyway, that's the kind of thing. This fools people. This is what happens when you reverse it. I think I did some of it. I think I did this. I went through it. This is what it is. This guy, Woolston Avenue. It's just public voter rolls turned into hex format to make it look technical and fooling him and a bunch of people. This is theater. Right. And so then, of course, times and dates and numbers and character sets are all different. Sets of different languages and stuff. You got different formats, like is the day first and a month first. All these things can ruin your whole day. One of the cases that I was not the main guy on, there was a case with about 10 million claimants. They mailed out the letters. They got the return. They were about to send out the checks. And then they said, hey, why don't you do a review of the database? So I reviewed the database, and I found this broken address. And I said, oh, here's another broken address. It turns out the original data came with like an extra line feed every 256 records, which broke it. So one out of every 256 mailings, the address and the zip code were broken, where you'd have the first half of the address from one person, the second half from another person. So all those letters, I found out how to find them. Then I checked, they all came back undeliverable. Those people never got their fair chance. And I said, I think you guys are in trouble. You're about to pay out this money, but all these people never got their letters. And I'm glad it was somebody else's case. And they said, oh, it'll be fine. And I said, I don't think it'll be fine. I think you need to let it mail to both attorneys and go to the judge and make some plan to set aside some of the money or something. I think there's going to be big trouble. And they said, oh, no. I said, well, it's not my case. Have a good day. I wrote a letter, here's my opinion. My opinion is in writing in case the question ever comes up, and I'll go do my cases. But I don't know whatever came of that. But anyway, thankfully nobody came to bug me about it. But what can you do? You can just tell people you're in trouble, and if they don't want to hear it, they say, well, like if you're, one of my students was called into a bank and said there's virus on the machine, clean it off. And he said, okay, I cleaned it off. And he called me and said, I'm not sure this job is done. And I said, I'm not sure that job is done either. You ought to be infected and see what else was infected, what else happened. He said, yeah, they don't want to pay for any of that. I said, well, then write a letter. I recommend that we do these other things, and if you don't want to do them, who am I? But there's going to be a record when everything comes crashing down and they're looking for people to blame. You'll have some defense. Anyway, all right, let me check for comments in the chat. Time formats. Yes, time formats are one of the many irritating things. Yes, I spend a lot of my time transforming data from one to another, and it's interesting. It's more interesting than you'd think it would be. It's like little puzzles. Anyway, so data theft. If somebody's been stealing data from your network, you can start with network anomalies. That would be nice. If they're just sending big files out the network and you can see big file transfers, that would be handy. Or host-based artifacts, like your network flow data would show a lot of volume or unusual protocols or something like failed login attempts or something on the network. Those might give you a clue. You might look for activity outside expected hours, connecting to unusual places, abnormally high CPU or disk as they're trying to compress large volumes of data to steal it. I'm just thinking, Bradley Manning, one of the biggest data thefts in history, none of this would have worked. He was at work, at his desk in normal working hours, and he copied the stuff to a DVD and labeled it Lady Gaga and carried it out telling him it was music. And I'm not sure any of that would have been picked up by any of these techniques. Writing a disk was not abnormal. He wasn't outside working hours. But anyway, what can you do? So follow your initial leads. If you have something like a date or a file name to restrict your search, then you have an idea where to start. Work for things that automatically start. Look for modified system binaries and other artifacts of an infection, like viruses. These are good things. in case they're using malware. But of course, a lot of people don't use malware anymore. Like Volt Typhoon does not use malware. A lot of the smarter attackers don't. They just use official system utilities. Sysinternals and Microsoft provide a whole bunch of utilities to launch processes and fix broken things and copy data and format data and compress data. You don't need to bring in malware to do all these things, and then you won't get. So it'd be easier to hide. Anyway, you find a CMD.exe in a different folder than it ought to be, that sort of thing. So search for things, see if you have a way to automate the process. This is something I noticed when I worked as a DBA at a private financial company. Some people would spend a lot of time trying to write scripts when you could just do it by hand and get the job done faster. The general rule was if there's less than 200 records, just do it by hand. If it's not really worth debugging a script until you got more, but you have to figure this out. So consider the volume of data, how long is it going to require to do it by hand, who can work on it, how likely is it to answer your question, how many more times am I going to have to do this? So these are all things you ought to consider when deciding whether it's worth automating the task or not. So you can use external resources sometimes. You do things manually. I remember a lot of my students are upset when they have to page through page after page hunting for something. And I said, man, that's the fundamental thing in forensic work is here's 100 pages. Read through these pages and find the anomalies. You get used to it. You don't freak out. Like this is almost everything. You can't get all the way to just the answer. You get to likely candidates, and then you have to read through a long list of things looking for the things that look funny. But you can sometimes use sorting and filtering. That helps a lot. Or statistical analysis, keyword searching. These are all various ways to try to find the needle in the haystack. There are external resources like the National Software Reference Library has hashes of known files. So you can just calculate a hash of every file, and any hash that matches this is not interesting. It's a known program file, system file. That will save you a lot of time. So here we are looking up things like cmd.exe, Notepad, MD5. These are all known files on my machine that had matching hashes, so I don't need to worry about them anymore. They're just an intact system file from a known producer and not indicating anything unusual like an infection. VirusTotal is, of course, the standard to test suspicious files. You can upload the file, but if you do, they will send it to antivirus companies, and you may not want that. You may not want to alert the attacker, so you might want to just search the hash, which will just see if there is a known analysis of this file without telling them anything they don't know. And that's what you do if you want to maintain OPSEC. So you can see it here. I don't know if I'll bother bringing this up, but it is really nice, all the information you get. This shows you behavior. This is service host in a strange folder, and it shows you down here what files it drops. It drops this file in an unusual place. Service host should not be in a temp file. It should be somewhere like C Windows System 32, and it sets some registry keys. Current version run. These are run keys, which will automatically relaunch the malware. So this is malware, and this is the kind of stuff you'll get right out of VirusTotal. You don't even have to run it yourself in a virtual machine or anything. That information is already up there. And here's another one. It goes to a VirusTotal sandbox, and it tells you what files are dropped, including this one here with the apparent email address of the man involved. This is quite common. I mean, I was running the OWASP Juice Shop, which is a normal web application running on my machine, and then right in the path is my username, which I hadn't thought of. I just put it in my home folder, ran it, and then it puts it in the URL, the path to the folder. So it's often your identifiers do show up in these automatically generated names, and that's handy. And there are a lot of investigations I've read where they did track down the bad guys with clues like this. Their name or their email address or a domain name, which is registered to their name or email address, is floating around in the malware or on the server it connects to, someplace. All right, you can search things, small things, manually. Manual review is always a big thing. You have to often do a manual review anyway, even when you've used some kind of tool. And another thing to be aware of is all your tools have bugs. All your tools have flaws. You cannot trust anything any of them tell you too much. If you find something really important, always verify it with a different tool. A simple tool like just a raw hex editor for the disk. Because it's every now and then your tools make mistakes. And if it's important, it's not good enough. So there are a lot of tools to help you. Visualizing data, ways to just lay out data so you can see anomalies are handy. That's data minimization. If you can sort or filter things, somehow find whole groups of them that are boring, remove all the ones that have the same length or all the ones that have appear to be automatically generated by a common tool, that sort of thing. Somehow remove the irrelevant stuff. Sorting and filtering is extremely helpful. I used to do this all the time. The most common thing we had was a huge list of addresses and names, and we had to get rid of the duplicates. There'd be multiple copies of the same person. And that is not good because when we mail out checks, we'll give them 2 or 3 checks with like a different spelling of their name. So we had, I think, first 3, last 5, address 11 was our most common thing. First 3 letters of the first name, first 5 letters of the last name, first 11 characters of the address line. That was a pretty good filter, but we tried all different things to try to, and you just make potential duplicates and then you look at them and try to decide if they're duplicates. The worst one I had was a fertilizer case. There was fertilizer price fixing for farms in like Iowa, and so there were like 10,000 farms that were going to get money back for having been ripped off by the fertilizer company, but it turned out the farms were huge. They'd be like 2 miles across, and they'd have like 4 offices in different corners of that thing with different names and addresses, but they're all the same farm. So deduping that was pretty challenging. You do what you can. Anyway, so often you don't know what you're looking for. You're just looking for something unusual, so you try to use some kind of log analysis tool. Here's Sawmill that will just give you graphs. Traffic, visitors, category of devices. These are just ways to try to find the unusual ones. Like here, here's desktops, here's mobile phones in green, and here's spiders in yellow. So maybe you want to decide one of those are suspicious. This looks like something happened there, but this is not interesting. Maybe something happened there. This is the sort of thing, you graph things in various ways to find the ones that stand out. In financial work, of course, you often do large claim reviews. Just whichever one have the largest dollar value, just do that thing manually for them to make sure that's logical. That's where the biggest risk is. All right, so string and keyword search is often what you do. You have strings like the name of a suspect, the name of someone involved, an IP address or something. So you search for those strings, search everything you can for those strings, read those things, find more important strings, and search and repeat until you're not finding anything new, and then you're done. Then you've done all you can do. This is the standard process to solve a case with data like a hard disk image. And we mentioned before, there's extra data in between the official files, the currently in use files. You might find something good in there, and forensic suites will find that stuff for you. Usually the only thing that's worth anything is the deleted files. Those are often interesting. The fragments of files are usually too small to be worth anything, but you might get lucky. File carving, the tool does this automatically. File carving is you have a bunch of blocks that are unallocated, and they have data in them, so you just look in the blocks to see if you can find the start of an image and the end of an image, start of a Word document and end of a Word document, and just sort of reconstruct that file. The tools do this automatically. That's called file carving. Foremost is an open source tool that does it too. And then you have to evaluate results. Periodically, evaluate your results and decide, are you actually getting somewhere, or have you somehow wandered off into a dark alley that's going nowhere? And at the end, have you actually answered the questions? This kind of thing. All right. And that's, you can tell, troubleshooting is the same. Experienced troubleshooter can quickly find the problem and fix it. An inexperienced troubleshooter uses an ineffective technique and wastes a lot of time not fixing the problem. For troubleshooting, at least, this process is simply, you always want to cut the problem in half. Is the problem local or at the server? Is it, somehow find a way to have a question like that where you can do a test and now you can narrow your focus. And I suppose in a more abstract way, the same is true of investigations. Someone uses stats to monitor CPU usage. Oh, okay, that's good. I haven't tried that one. Let's try a Kahoot. It's 152, chapter 11. Start. All right. Zen Hacker is one of the names I figured out this morning. Who that was? That's you. Okay, good. Saw it in the board. So you got your points, I think.
Yes.
Good, okay. But that's like Quinoa. I saw that name, and those people didn't get their points. I couldn't figure out who it was. So Quinoa, if you got points, on the scoreboard, you might not have got them. Not if they're under that name. Fixie Mom, I figured out. And Rouhani, that's good. Ooh, I don't think I saw Wood on the board. Wood used a different name on the board. Anyway, that's the way it goes. That's why it's good that you people check your grade. Make sure I gave it to you, because my chaotic system with all the extra credit stuff floating around creates the problem. I think I'm going to have like a checkbox you check if you're actually a student. There's like 100 people doing Boston stock that are not in the class. I didn't anticipate that. It would be better if the 15 people in the class were actually separated. Well, you know. Organization is not my long shoot, in case you hadn't noticed. All right. All right. So which device does not have user data? Firewalls, although these days they might have malware on them. All right, which format is called expert witness? Most people think of it as the encased format, but it actually inherited it from a long-defunct tool called Expert Witness. Anyway, that's the most common format because it's compressed and broken up into 2 gigabyte chunks. So you can copy it on FAT drives at no problem. It's easiest to handle your data when it's in an Expert Witness format. Which image format is used by virtual machines? VMDK, by the way, that's for VMware. Microsoft Hyper-V, of course, has their own, and VirtualBox has their own, just so we're all miserable all the time. But anyway, all right. All right, word encoding uses uppercase and lowercase letters and numbers. Okay, that's base 64. All the uppercase letters, all the lowercase letters, all the numbers, and then 2 punctuation marks, like a slash and something, question mark or something. Anyway, that's to get 64 characters, which is enough to encode 6 bits. All right. And what technique finds headers and footers to reconstruct images? That's file carving. Good. All right. Oops. All right. I don't know who all those people are. All right. I'm going to stop this recording.